But defenders of the official story said, oh, no, that's not true. 30,000 Popular Mechanics, wrote a book defending the official theory. And one of its authors said 40,000, 50,000 feet, cell phone calls, perfectly possible. But while Popular Mechanics was making that brave claim, the CIA was pulling the rug out from it. This was 2006. At the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, you remember the so-called 20th hijacker, the FBI was asked to turn in all sorts of evidence relating to 9/11. Part of their evidence was a report about phone calls from all 4 flights. What did they say when they got to Flight 93? They said of the 37 calls from that flight, 35 of them were made on seatback phones, onboard phones, air phones. 2 of them only were made on cell phones, and those were made when the plane was just about ready to crash, so it was down at a very low altitude. So you see, the FBI implicitly agreed with the 9/11 Truth Movement. High-altitude phone calls from airliners were not possible. Well, what do we do then about all the people who said were absolutely convinced they got cell phone calls from their loved ones? Many people said, my husband, my wife said, I'm calling on the cell phone. In one case, a person was told that the passenger had borrowed a phone from next seat neighbor. Well, in those cases you might say, well, they got confused, they forgot, bad memory, whatever. But what about Dina Burnett? She couldn't have misunderstood. She saw the cell phone number of her husband Tom. And she couldn't have misremembered. She told the FBI that very day. We have the written report. Then she went on talk shows and she talked about this. She wrote a book, talked about it. So what do we do about the fact that she evidently received a call, three or four calls from her husband's cell phone, and now the FBI says, no, he used an onboard phone. Now, this is speculation, but there is pretty good speculation. There is a technology that could explain that, and it was functioning at the time. In 1999, William Arkin, a well-known writer about military affairs, published an article in the Washington Post reporting an experiment, a demonstration that he had observed of the new technology of voice morphing, which allows people to simulate the voice of another person. And so well, in fact, that you could fool the best friend or even a spouse. And he reported that he heard the voice of Colin Powell saying, I'm being treated well by my captors. He heard another well-known general saying, ladies and gentlemen, we have just launched World War III. Neither of those generals had made those statements, but everybody in the room who knew them and knew their voices would have thought it was them. Now, we know about the form of digital morphing, the visual kind, like in Forrest Gump, when Forrest Gump shakes hands with JFK. You know that didn't happen, and yet it was perfectly lifelike. And so Arkin points out, because of digital morphing, we can no longer say seeing is believing. You can see, but it may not be true. And then he likewise pointed out, now thanks to voice morphing, hearing isn't necessarily believing either. Now, what about the phone, the number? Well, there are little devices you can order on the internet in which it says, fake any phone call you want to. So you can make any phone call appear on somebody's caller ID that you would like it be. So at least it's possible, and to me it seems likely, that that's what happened. In any case, FBI also turned in a report about Flight 77, which is the flight that allegedly struck the Pentagon. And this contradicts the official story even more. That is the FBI's report. The most important of all the phone calls from that day were two from Barbara Olson. That is, two who were reported by her husband, Ted Olson, Theodore Olson, who was the Solicitor General of the Department of Justice. And of course, Barbara Olson was a well-known commentator on CNN. Ted Olson told CNN that day and told the FBI that Barbara had called him twice that morning, that she was on Flight 77, that hijackers had taken over the plane. They were armed with knives, and this is the only alleged phone call that mentioned box cutters. So this gives you an idea how important this story was to creating the official myth or story about 9/11, that we all know the hijackers had box cutters thanks to this one call. Another way this call was very important was that because she was very popular, especially with the right wing, this so outraged America that these evil Muslim Arab terrorists had killed Barbara Olson, that people were ready to go kill Arab Muslims. And a lot of people said, you know, it didn't matter too much if they were responsible for 9/11 or not. So this was instrumental to getting the whole psychology, the mentality of the American people ready to support the war on terror. Another way this call was important, there was a rumor that Flight 77 had crashed in the Midwest. The FAA took this very seriously. The FAA controllers have completely lost control, radar contact with the plane, and there was a report of a crash on the Ohio-Kentucky border. These calls reported from Barbara Olson were proof that Flight 77 was still aloft and therefore could have been what damaged the Pentagon. However, when you look at the FBI's report, and you can all read this for yourself, it's on a website. And if you don't know how to get to it, if you buy the New Pearl Harbor Revisited and look in the notes, you can find how to get there. Here is what the FBI report said. They're little graphics, so you can just read, see what they say. And here's what the graphic says about Barbara Olson. It does mention that she attempted a call, but it says, Barbara Olson attempted one call, unconnected, duration 0 seconds. Thank you. This is supposed to create a shock. But I'm surprised. Surely the Boston Globe reported this. This has been public knowledge since 2006. I can't believe it. Now, the reason this is so amazing is that the FBI is part of the Department of Justice. And yet this FBI report was saying that the story told on 9/11 by Ted Olson, the former Solicitor General of the Department of Justice, isn't true. Those calls never happened. That gives you two choices. Either Ted Olson lied or he was deceived like Dina Burnett. Either way, the whole thing is a lie. It was based on deception.